بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل سيدنا إبراهيم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد كما باركت على سيدنا إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم لا علم إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم انشر علينا رحمتك وانزل علينا حكمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. اللهم انشر علينا رحمتك وانزل علينا حكمة الجلال والإكرام. اللهم انشر علينا رحمتك وانزل علينا حكمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. وصل اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. So last week we looked at Uhud, and inshallah a few things about Uhud that are important. One, Uhud was really the only serious affliction that the Muslims had in terms of battles, losses. Obviously, there are other events that take place. For instance, the Qurra that were killed, there were 70 reciters that were killed out of treachery. But other than that, if you actually look at the Ghazawat of the Prophet ﷺ, Uhud was different from the others in that there was victory was promised to the Muslims, but there were conditions. And one of the conditions was thabat, being steadfast, and the other was not disobeying the Messenger of Allah. And both of those were broken by the Rumat. The fact is, though, that they were forgiven. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgave them. The ayahs were revealed forgiving them, and in fact the loss of life was part of that forgiveness. So what was learned from that really is, one, victory is promised to the Muslims, and this is a promise from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but that victory is contingent upon certain things. It's contingent upon obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger. It's contingent upon steadfastness, and it's contingent upon not disagreeing amongst one another. Because tanazu' leads to fashal. It's the nature of disagreement. And tanazu' is different from ikhtilaf. We can differ, but when there's tanazu', what's really happening, in fact, is the hearts are differing. Ikhtilaf, difference of opinion, difference of understanding, those things are things that the Muslims, in fact, it's part of our deen, and the deen honors. But the idea of actually tanazu', which is where one group leaves another group, they separate themselves, either inwardly or outwardly. There's a separation, there's a splitting and a severing. And that's what happened really at Uhud, because when Abdullah radiallahu anhu was commanding them, he was the Amir, and they separated from him. It wasn't a matter of a difference of opinion. He was telling them what to do, they disobeyed him, and the results were what ensued from that. Now, the other thing is Uhud. The Ansar proved themselves on that day, because over 70 Ansar were lost. And out of the people that were lost from the Muhajirin, one of the closest people to the Messenger of Allah was Hamza, and then Mus'ab ibn Umair, who was an extremely important figure in the actual introduction of Islam into Medina, and then Abdullah bin Jahsh, who was also very close to the Prophet ﷺ, both in blood and in heart. And in fact, partly probably honoring him, it's a sunnah of the Muslims to take care of the widows of martyrs. And it's an obligation. And the Prophet ﷺ did marry his wife. So that was an honor for both of them. Now, one of the things that happens is the burial of the martyrs. Because Hamza did not have what are called the bawaki, some of the Ansar women got together to actually weep for him, and the Prophet prohibited it. And this was also something important because in the Jahili Arab tradition, they used to do excessive weeping for the dead. And people were paid, I'd mentioned that before. And in this case, the Prophet ﷺ, despite the extraordinary love and closeness that the Prophet ﷺ had with Hamza, he was his brother in the Rada'ah, he was his blood uncle, and he was also one of his staunchest supporters right from the beginning of Islam. Even during the time that he was not Muslim, he was standing by the Prophet ﷺ as both a martial warrior, he was a very powerful man, but also as a support spiritually and emotionally. So, despite that fact, the Prophet ﷺ did not allow them, although he did weep, and the other relatives of the family wept. So this is a great loss for the family of the Prophet ﷺ. And also Thabit ibn Dahdaha, who, if you remember, was the man who bought from Abu Lubaba the palm grove to give to the orphan. And the Prophet ﷺ, actually, when he saw him, he said, palms with low-hanging, heavy-laden clusters, what a multitude of these has Ibn Dahdah in paradise. So that palm grove that he purchased, and he was promised in it in paradise, according to the Prophet ﷺ, was given to him. And one of them also, he mentions Usayrim, who was a man who had been amongst the Aus. He had not been a Muslim. And they actually spoke to him before he died. And they asked him, what brought you here? And he said, for some reason Islam came into my heart and I came out to fight. And he is the man who never prayed or fasted or did wudu or anything. And he was granted paradise. So that's what he was known for after that. The man who entered paradise without ever having prayed a prayer. And then Mukhayraq is another important person. Mukhayraq was a rabbi from Tha'laba, one of the Jewish clans, and he actually had told his people, we have an oath and we shouldn't break the oath. And they refused, and he actually told them, if I die, then my property is for the Prophet ﷺ, and Allah will show him what to do with it. And so he actually went out and he was killed, and the Prophet ﷺ said that he was the best of the Jews, Mukhayraq, Khairul Yahud, he was the best of the Jews. So he fulfilled his oath with the Messenger of Allah, and Allahu A'lam what his state was at that time, but and then the Prophet ﷺ, you can go now to Uhud and visit the graves there. They're there, and they were actually moved. So Sayyidina Hamza, Abdullah bin Jahsh, Mus'ab ibn Umair are buried, and the other Ansar that were there. Now, the next thing that's interesting is, and we talked a little bit about this, is the battle. It's not a battle, but it was a ghazwa, in which they actually went out the very next day. And the Prophet ﷺ only permitted those who had been there for the Battle of Uhud to go out. Even though others wanted to go out, he only allowed those to go out. And they actually some of them had to be carried. And they went out on that ghazwa, and they did not meet the Quraysh, but one of the things that they did was they lit fires. Each man lit a fire. So it appeared to the Quraysh, in fact, that there were much larger numbers of people, and they sent some scouts to see, because they actually were thinking about going back to Medina and finishing it off. But they were worried. And when they saw that they were actually coming out, they thought that tribes had come and other people from Medina had come out. And so they actually got worried and they hastened back to Mecca. And then obviously Abu Sufyan makes an oath that he'll meet them again in Badr. And Badr was a place where there was a marketplace every year in Shawwal. So it was a place of gathering for the Arabs. There was a well there and some other some tribes in that vicinity. Now, again, Abdullah ibn Ubay is making trouble. He's using this as an opportunity to stir up dissemblance amongst the believers, trying to tell them that, this is the problem of I had the opinion to stay in the city, and then look what happened when you went against my opinion, and had you not gone out, nobody would have been afflicted, and this and that. And this is where the Prophet ﷺ said, Lo yaftahu bab ash-shaytan. Lo opens up a door for shaitan to come in, to say, had I not, or if I hadn't, or if I... It opens up a door for shaitan to come in. And this is why, although it's useful to look back and see what one did wrong and what to analyze. In other words, it's not simply just forgetting the past. There's a wisdom in looking, what did we do wrong, and how do we do it better in the future? But to use... had I not, or if I hadn't, this wouldn't have happened. No. You have to look back and recognize what happened was meant to happen. There was no other way that it could have happened, because it's over. And then how do we correct ourselves so that we don't make those same mistakes the next time? So that type of dissembling, which obviously the munafiqun were very adept at and were constant in that, and Abdullah ibn Ubay is at the head of them. And one of the things that's important at the end here is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds them, do you think that you can enter paradise without Allah testing you and seeing which of you are steadfast and which of you are not? And then he makes a point here that I think is really important. The revelation made it nonetheless clear that those who had disobeyed orders had expiated their faults on the battlefield and had been forgiven. Part of their expiation had been their great sorrow at hearing the Prophet was dead. Now this is important because one of the conditions of Tawbah is nadama. And that is a sign of Tawbah, is nadama, which you'll see Abu Lubaba at the Battle of Al-Khandaq. I mean, that was why فَاعْتَرَفُوا بِذُنُوبِهِمْ. He felt remorse for what he did. So remorse is a sign of Tawbah. And if there's remorse, it's a good sign. And when they heard that the Prophet had been killed, they were actually devastated because they felt that they'd let the Prophet down, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And obviously the loss of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and what that meant. Now, it was also affirmed with reference to the visible ruins that remained from previous civilizations that the established order of things in Arabia would pass away and Islam would triumph. So, the idea of tilka al-umam qad khalat, those people that went before you, they're gone. And this too will go. This Jahiliyyah Arabia is on its way out, in fact. And Allah tells them to travel in the land and see those who rejected the messengers and what happened to them. And then there was another important reference also, which is about the Prophet ﷺ, that the Prophet is a messenger, and other messengers have passed away before him. Right? And this is an ayah in which Sayyidina Umar said, after the Prophet died, when Abu Bakr repeated this ayah, he said, it's as if the first time I'd ever even heard it. So, they weren't really, it was difficult to imagine life, obviously, without the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so this was a reminder that if he dies or if he's slain, are you just going to turn around and leave Islam? In other words, Islam has to go on, even in the absence of the physical presence of the Prophet ﷺ. But the presence of his guidance will go on with Islam. So the Prophet ﷺ, his sunnah, his guidance, and the transmission of that continues on. And that's what's important, because each generation has to take it on. Now, after that, there wasn't any difficulty, but there was a little bit after that, there was news that Bani Asad of Khuzaymah were planning to make a raid on Medina. And so, obviously Bani Asad has a lot of ties. There's kin ties here, which is problematic. But the Prophet ﷺ has to show them that he's prepared to do business even after Uhud, because obviously this news is going to go all over the Arabian Peninsula. The Muslims were defeated at Uhud by the Quraysh. So this is important, and the idea of the sustained losses that were afflicted were so heavy that perhaps they'd be unable to do that. So other tribes were thinking, well, now it's time for us to get into action. And so they set out there. And the Prophet ﷺ actually sent, they went out and they didn't, it just dispersed. And they actually did capture some people. So there was about 150 people went out, and there was a little bit of bloodshed shed. And after that, the Bedouin just got frightened and actually dispersed from different areas. And then another thing that's important here is there was a leader, Sufyan bin Khalid bin Nubih al-Hudali from Hudayl, who was he was a Lihyani. Bani Lihyan was a clan of Hudayl, and he was actually he was a shaitan, and he was trying to get he said, it's time for us now to act just like the Quraysh did, and so he was gathering peoples against him. And the Prophet ﷺ, there was one of the Ansar there, Abdullah bin Unais, was a Khazraji. He asked permission. The Prophet ﷺ gave him permission to go to him and to assassinate him. And he asked him, well, how would I know him? He told him to say you're from Khuza'a. When he asked you, say you're from Khuza'a. He said, how will I know him? He said, he looks like shaitan. Which, it's interesting that there are people that, they remind you of shaitan when you see them, right? There's faces of dark people that when you see them, they remind you of shaitan. And he said, you'll actually shudder when you see him. So it's just evil in somebody's heart. So this man goes, Abdullah bin Unais, and they're all there, they're gathering. This is not far from Arana, which is outside of Mecca. And he says, min al-rajul, and he said he's from Khuza'a. So they begin to talk. He said, I heard you're gathering against Muhammad and I wanted to join you, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And so they go and they talk, and they're walking, and after a time, people disperse, new man's in, and there's no big... And Sufyan was very impressed with this man, and then he went to sleep, and he waited to make sure that nobody was looking, and he killed him. And then he went back to Medina. And because the leader was killed, it dispersed the... So again, this is war. This was a political assassination during a war, and it dispersed a lot. It meant a lot of people would not have to die because of this man's death. Now, another event, which is the Raji' event, is the Prophet ﷺ sent Asim bin Thabit al-Ansari and some others to actually as spies. He says in here that they were going to give religious instruction, but that was a pretext. They were actually going to look at what the Quraysh were up to, and they were betrayed by the people that were going with them as guides on the pretext of going to their tribe to teach them. And what happens is they actually, Al-Asim refuses to surrender. They told them, we'll give you aman. And he said he wouldn't take aman from a mushrik. The three that went down were actually killed. And so there was a battle ensued between them, and Asim was killed. But from that, and interestingly, he mentions that Asim had killed two of the standard bearers of Quraysh, and his mother had actually sworn an oath to drink wine from his skull. So Hudayl thought, that they can make some money off taking the skull into Mecca and selling it to this woman, because they would do whatever they had to do to fulfill their oath. And a large gathering of bees started hovering around this skull, so they decided to leave it. And that night there was a rain, and it actually took the skull so they didn't ever get to do that. But what happens is two people were captured, Khubayb al-Awsi and also Zayd al-Khazraji, and they were sold to the Quraysh. And they were actually taken out to Tan'im, outside of the Haram. They actually waited until the Ashhur al-Huram went out, the sacred month, and then they took them outside of the Haram Sharif, so they wouldn't kill them in the Haram. And they told them to leave Islam, and they both refused. And Khubayb bin Adi, he actually said some lines of poetry. لَسُ أُبَارِي حِينَ أُقْتَلُ مُسْلِمًا. He told them in poetic form, I have no concern whenever I die as a Muslim. عَلَى أَيْ جَنْبٍ كَانَ فِي اللَّهِ مَصْرَعِي. No matter what the circumstances, for the sake of Allah was my death. He doesn't care. وذلك في ذات الإله وإن يشاء يبارك على أوصال شلو ممزع. And that is for the sake of Allah, right? And so, if He wants, then my blood and flesh and ripped up body will be blessed. When he was actually killed, the Prophet ﷺ, and then they also, another thing, that they tried to turn him away from the Qibla, because he prayed 2 rakats. And when he finished, they wanted to turn him away from the Qibla, and he said the ayah, wherever you turn, there's the face of Allah. So they killed him. The Prophet was sitting with Zayd and other companions in Medina, and he said that, wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. And then they asked him what, and he said, Jibreel just brought me salam from Khubayb. So it's amazing things happening here. And the other thing that was important is Akhnas ibn Shariq, who we remember from Zuhra, who was important in that early period also. When he saw, one of them said, wouldn't you rather now that Muhammad be in your place? Right? They said to him as they're about to kill him. And he said, I wouldn't feel comfortable even if the Prophet ﷺ was getting thorns or anything. I'd rather be in his place. And so this man, Akhnas, said that no father loves his sons the way these people love the Prophet ﷺ. And this is the important thing about, I think, all through the seerah, what we're getting from these people is you sense they're doing what they're doing out of mahabba of Allah and His Messenger, which is so different from a lot of the modern ideas in Islam of, compelling people, forcing people to pray, forcing people to do things. I mean, how do you get people to do things out of love? How do you get that because, any tyrant can get people to do things out of fear. But it's really the great man who gets people to do things out of love. And then another thing that's important here, Ubaidah, who died, left a widow, Zainab, who's the daughter of Khuzaymah, of the Bedouin tribe of Amir. Bani Amir was an important tribe, and she was known as al-Masakin before Islam, because she was very generous to poor people. And a year after she was still a widow, the Prophet ﷺ asked to marry, and there was a 4th compartment made for her. Now, Abu Bara, who was the chief of her tribe, when he found out that she married the Prophet ﷺ, he went. And this is again kinship bonds, because when there's marriage between these tribes, there was a bond there, and so this is important. So he actually goes, and the Prophet ﷺ tells him about Islam, and he said, "This is all good, but I'm not ready to accept it. But why don't you send some people to my people, and I'll teach them?" The Prophet said, "Akhafu alayhim ahl al-Najd." I'm fearful of the tribes of Najd. And he said, "I promise their protection." And he was a tribal chieftain, so he could do this. So the Prophet ﷺ trusted him and chose 70. He says 40, there was 70. And he chose actually some of the most learned of the companions, called al-Qurra. They were all very well versed in the Quran, and they memorized everything that had been revealed of the Quran. And he sent them out on this expedition to go and teach these people. Now, there was a letter sent ahead by Abu Bara, and what happens is that because there was a dispute over this was an aging tribal leader, and one of his relatives who wanted to take control of the tribe was not willing to accept the Muslims in, to teach them or anything. And so what he does is he actually tries to get the tribe to attack. And they refuse, and they say, no, if Abu Bara has given them protection, we have to honor that. And so what he does is he gets some clans from Sulaim and convinces them to go and attack these people. And they actually go and attack these people and kill all of them except for 2. It was very treacherous what they did. And the 2 that he mentions in here, they asked them what they wanted to do. And Harith actually said, just give me some weapons and let me start over again. And they did that, and he killed 2 of them until they killed them. And then Amr, they set free. But one of the things that they did is they asked him to identify the people. And this is important to note. I mean, you see, why would they want to know that? They want to know who they just killed, because they're worried about tha'ar, about blood revenge, so they want to know exactly who they're dealing with amongst these people. And he goes and shows them, and then he says, did you find everybody? And he mentions there's only one Amr bin Fuhaira, I didn't find him, who was a freed slave of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, and or a mawla. And then one man who had killed him actually said, I want to understand this. I thrust a spear through him, and I heard him say, Fuztu wa Rabb al-Kaaba, by the Lord of the Kaaba, I've won. So he says, he's talking about Shahada, and he explained that to them. And this was an interesting event, because these people actually become Muslims. So this was they were very deeply moved by this as well, despite the fact that there was treachery. And the Prophet ﷺ actually made dua against them for 1 month every day at Fajr, in the actual Fajr prayer, because he was so disturbed by their treachery. And it was very rare that the Prophet made dua against people. And the Prophet also, ﷺ, when he heard of the event, he mentioned that Amr was amongst the Illiyin, the highest places in paradise.